Hello, welcome to polyplane.com. I'm Gabe Matthews. Today we're going to wrap up the Intro to Rendering series with the 8th and final video, bringing it all together, where we're going to take everything we learned in the previous 7 videos of this series and use it to render out our scene. So let's get right to it. Okay, so when we last left our model here, we've built the materials, we've set up our scene, we've put our lights in, we've built our environment, we've got a plane on the ground to catch some shadows that we'll adjust in post in Photoshop. What I'm going to do is because this is just an intro to rendering series, I'm not going to get into all the bells and whistles of the options of both programs that I'm going to render this chair in. In Vray, which once you have Vray installed, you'll get a little tab up here, and you can start messing around. When you first have like Rhino or pretty much any other program, you have a couple of you have your basic option of just Rhino render, which is like the default. So you'll have to make sure that you click on Vray. KeyShot is actually a separate program, which I'll pull up in a little bit and do the rendering that way. But I just want to kind of dive right in here. So with Vray open, we need to create some options. Now, as I said in the previous video, ASGViz had released some really nice presets that you can use, and we're just going to assume the best for the render already and go with a very high quality setting. If I go into options here, it created some preset switches as far as the output and the quality and all these like little bells and whistles. The only things that we really need to concern ourselves with in this video is the output, which we're going to override and have it be at like 1280 by 960, but then we're going to click view aspect, and that'll actually make it so that the viewport window is the actual proportions of the rendering. So I'm going to actually reduce the main shot back here and click view aspect so I get a proper window. So that's what our render window proportions are going to be with the width being at 1280. The other thing we're going to do here is we're going to set the background to white. Click OK. And that way any of the reflections will be white. Now there's one other thing that I'm going to do, because this isn't an office scene. I need to have some reflections built into all those chrome surfaces. So I'm going to click on my reflection tab here and select a bitmap. And I want this to be an environment and a mirror ball. And what that means is that whatever map I choose, it'll actually reflect that back into the environment and assist with the reflections. So we're gonna select something that's very neutral. You can't really tell what's going on. We just needed to inform the reflections. So we'll do this industrial skylight texture, and what that's going to do is that's going to show up on the reflections so that it's not just the chrome surfaces won't just be reflecting white back, they'll be reflecting some sort of color to add a little additional context to the rendering. So I'll click apply, and we don't need to worry about refraction because we don't have any clear materials in this scene. And then if you were to not have the preset tools that I use there, you'd need to go ahead and set some of these other tools like the irradiance map and the indirect illumination. There's a lot of websites out there that actually talk about those things. And right below the video, you're going to see a bunch of links to websites that actually go into depth on bells and whistles of Vray, so you can explore that in a little more depth. Our size looks good, our environment looks good. You can do a distributor rendering, which means that if you have Vray installed on multiple machines, you can use the processing power of those other computers to actually do the rendering. I'm not going to select that now, only because I'm not on a network that has multiple machines hooked up to it at the moment. Global switches, we don't need to worry about batch rendering. I'm going to be covering a plugin for Rhino called Badger pretty soon here, and we'll talk about batch rendering there. But we want to make sure our lights are on, our shadows are on, everything else looks fine, and then that's about it. Now that we've got sort of our basic settings for Vray set up, I'm actually ready to render. So I want to make sure that I'm on my main shot view here. I'm going to click render, and then I'm just going to let it cook for a minute so you can see how that process starts. So you start with a black screen and it's trying to figure everything out. Now you won't be able to see the floor well, you can kind of see it. when I save this file out as a PNG file, everything in the background will actually go away, meaning that it'll be transparent. So when I composite this back into the photograph that we've been using, it'll actually show up. Now in KeyShot, I don't have to worry about that because the backplate automatically can be populated in. But what you're seeing are there's little squares, and those squares represent the cores of the processor rendering the thing. And you can start to see some of those reflections from the file that I chose are kind of bouncing back and informing some of the reflections. So, okay, so our rendering is all done here, and I'm actually going to render this out one more time at a larger size because I really want to take advantage of the shadows that are cast in there, because it's going to be a really subtle effect on the floor and I want it to look right. I'm going to save this in what's called a rendering folder. I'm going to save this as main 1, and you typically want to actually match what the rendering viewport is called, so that everything has sort of a consistency to it. So it's main underscore shot hyphen 1. So I'm actually going to do that instead, just to keep everything consistent. Okay, and then I'm going to close this, but then I'm going to go back to the options, take the output out, and there's actually no limit to the size of your rendering. So I'm just going to choose the largest here just to get a lot of detail but not take a huge amount of time, and re-render it just because it went pretty quick. Only it was like 3 minutes or something. So we'll do it larger so we can get more details and extract more information from the rendering when we put it back into the composite. Okay, so we're done with this one. We're going to save this as well. I like to save a lot of renderings. We're going to call this main shot hyphen 1-2. Okay, and then we're just going to go down the line and do the other 2 views here. Okay, so the this leg shot has finished up and it looks pretty good. As I suspected, there are a few little highlights that I need to adjust. Some of them look a little sharp, and you know, it's kind of a subjective thing. You know, I might just leave it be, but overall it looks good. This is at 50%. If I just click on the render window and scroll with my mouse wheel, I can zoom into 100%, and you can see the view percentage right up at the top bar. It looks pretty clean. So the last one we need to do, the cushion detail shot. That's this one right here, and we'll click render, and once again I'll just let this start up and resume it when it's finished up. This is all done and rendered up. We can get a closer view of how this looks here, and see that it looks pretty good. A couple of things I'm going to correct. So the screw in this front corner wasn't positioned correctly in the model. So what I'll wind up doing is actually brushing that into red and pretty much doing a little bit of post work to make those look right. It should look more like this one. And that right here, it looks like fabric. So I feel like the texture did a pretty good job representing what we're trying to communicate there. Now the one thing I want to make sure to do is save this, and we'll call this cushion shot 1. And one thing I didn't do that I should have done earlier on when I was doing my main shot was actually render the chair without the floor. And the reason being is that we need to actually composite out the floor plane because we only want the shadows from it later. So what I'm going to do is just hide that floor plane and re-render that. And then when it's done, it'll just be the chair on its own. So let's go ahead and re-render that main shot like that. And then we'll have that ready to composite out. We're not actually going to use the RGB. We're actually going to use the alpha, which is sort of black and white version of the render that is created the same time that you're doing the rendering, and I'll show you that after it's done rendering, and we're going to save that. We don't actually need the color version, just the alpha, so which I've already actually saved right here. This is just the alpha, which we're going to use as a mask later, but I just want to go through the process of showing you how that's done. So if you go through to Vray options and then you go to your VFB channels here, you'll see all sorts of different things that you can put when you create a rendering. These are all sorts of different channels that you can select. So if I go, I can see that alpha and color selected. So if I go to my VHB and come up here to the top, you can see RGB color and alpha are the two that are already in there due to what I've done here. So if I were to select, say, reflection and add that, it would then show up in this list at the end of the next time I'm doing the rendering. So, but we don't need the reflection; we just need the alpha and the color. So I will go ahead and just render this at that main shot, just so I have it. And this is going to probably go pretty quick. The other thing while this is rendering, I might as well show you, is there's a certain renders offer you the ability to kind of track and only render where your mouse is. This can be useful if you just really need to see a select part of your rendering, and then you can uncheck it and it'll go back to its regular pattern. But that's just a nice little thing. Okay, so that's all rendered up. So what I would do is I would click on save, and I'm actually going to save this as main shot -1 -2 alpha. We'll call it color alpha. You would go to the alpha version, which it's rendered out, save that. I've already saved this out. I'm just going to save over just so I know everything works together. Now we can jump into KeyShot. As I said, this is a separate program, but it's really stupid easy to use. So you're going to go to File, Open, and open up your model. Make sure, because the orientation from program to program changes, you know which of your ups is up, and in Rhino Z is up, and you want to snap it to the ground and click OK. And this is actually why it's great to separate your model into layers, because now my texture mapping has remained, and I've got a pretty good indication of where my materials go, and those materials are kind of broken out per layer. So if I go on my options plane, you'll notice the first thing you'll notice about KeyShot is the interface is really minimal. And this is KeyShot 2. They're all the way up to like 4 now. I really liked KeyShot 2, so I've kind of stuck with this. But what we want to do is we turn off the environment plane, because we're not going to use it for this. We're actually going to put our backplate in, and there's already an imaginary ground that's sort of keyed out. If I just need to navigate to that backplate image of the office space here, we're already looking pretty awesome. So if you just click on the window and hit K, there'll be a hotkey window that'll pop up, and you can learn all about the different tools for toggling the camera around. They're pretty basic, but anyway, I'm just going to position this in sort of a familiar position towards what we had in the other view when working in Vray. Now, the cool thing about this is it's a little more easy to get an idea of how the shadows are going to play with everything, and looking all good. We're going to turn off the backplate for a minute because I need to apply some materials. Now, what you can do with KeyShot is you can click on the materials, and it comes with like a lot of great preloaded stuff. I'm not going to do any material creation in this video because this is more about rendering. But to give you a basic idea, is KeyShot's a live renderer. So as I update my scene where the camera is, it's actually continually thinking about where light needs to bounce to make it look real. So anyway, without wasting much time here, I'm just going to go to the metal selection and get a chrome. Actually, I might actually go with a paint. There's a really beautiful paint that I've used before for this model, the metallic silver, and I'm just going to drop that on one of the legs to show you what that looks like. And you can see how beautiful the highlights are. And this is, I haven't even loaded the proper softbox for the lighting in here, but you can already see how nice that looks. So this is one way you can drag out materials and apply them to your model. The other way you can do it is if you go to your scene palette and you find the pieces that are titled leg, you can actually drag the material out and put it there, and it'll update I wanted it to go on the leg upper. Everything for cushions, we don't need to ignore that, but I do want to turn them off for a minute, just because I want to apply a specific material to both the sides and the screws there. So we'll find the chrome metal here, maybe a polished steel, and apply that to those side pieces. And the cool thing about doing that too is it kind of helps you navigate where things are, because sometimes when these elements come in, they're not easy to find in your palette. So you can kind of determine by what material you just applied, you'll see a change and know what is what. And I can see all those screws there that are visible. Those are what I want to mess with. So I'm going to actually give those a anodized red finish. And when I select multiple things in my list, it'll actually update everything. The wheels, we're going to give those sort of a darker plastic color. Probably maybe I soft touch. Yeah, I've created a soft touch black that looks pretty good, so I will select that and put it on the wheels. All right, so we've got the leg uppers; those are good. Anything that's got that metallic silver on it I can hide for a minute, and we can focus on the base and the wheel lowers and the tilt lock. So for the wheel lowers, or the leg lowers, I might actually give those like a deep cherry red. Let's see how those look. That's kind of nice. Let's see how that looks with the upper leg. Yeah, I think those two colors work really well together. Come back in and maybe do like a scarlet red for the tilt lock. And I think that base will actually make that like a textured plastic. So, I mean, that's really all there is to applying a material in KeyShot, is just dragging stuff out as you need to. And there's a lot of different tutorials out there for actually creating materials. So I'm just going to skip past that for a minute and just show everything except for the environment, just to get it all back in place. That looks pretty cool. And you'll notice our texture mapping on the cushion came through because that's actually a Rhino function that's built into the model. So that's very useful. So you could, at this point, you could just let this cook, but I want to actually bring that back plate in again, and we're just going to position this back how we had it before, and we need to adjust the camera POV a little bit. So something like that looks pretty good. Just a little bit further, and this is one of those give and take things where you're just going to play around and see what you can do to make it right. Now, the one thing about the post-production on a KeyShot render is it's a little bit trickier, because if you're going to save it with the backplate in there, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to actually adjust individual elements. So if you do need to hide your environment, you need to hide your backplate, so that what happens is everything kind of renders on white, and then come back in, adjust the levels of certain areas in Photoshop, and then bring it back together. But we're going to keep the backplate in there. We're going to keep the environment in there. We're actually going to change this environment to the same environment that we used in the Vray reflection channel. So I'll get that. It's industrial lighting here, and that's looking really blue. So I want to turn the brightness down just a little and bring the gamma up. And you can actually dynamically control how illuminated it gets, but you kind of want to match the scene. So that looks pretty good. Maybe darken it just a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. And then we also want to come in here, make sure ground reflections are turned off, because we don't have any reflections that we need to worry about. If you do want to rotate you can actually rotate the environment around in KeyShot, just to kind of push the shadows around a little bit. And I'm not liking. It seems to me like the reflection or the shadows on the ground aren't coming through very well, but we're gonna stick with it for a second, because I want to adjust some of the real-time settings. So I'm gonna actually take the bounces up to 16 for the ray bounces, and increase the shadow quality quite a bit. Indirect ground illumination and detailed indirect illumination, get those all turned on. And the other thing I'm going to do, because this photograph is sort of blown out a little bit, is I'm going to turn the bloom on, which kind of makes it a little more dreamy, and so it'll have sort of a soft illustrated quality to it, which I think will help match it to the illustration. So now you could actually go ahead and click on render and render out the image, and it'll do very much what Vray did of like creating little render buckets that go ahead and do the calculation of the scene. But we're not going to do that. We're actually just going to only use the real-time render and do a screenshot of it, because what I want to do is compare what Vray output to what KeyShot's basic function output. And I'm not going to have any vignetting. I might turn down the bloom radius a little bit, and I think that should be it. We could add a depth of field to this as well. Because everything else is in focus, I don't think it's going to really need that. So we'll just leave that alone. All right, so the rendering's pretty much set up, and I mean, you could see with my fiddling aside, that was a pretty simple process. All right, so I'm just going to let this cook for a little while. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes now, and I'd say that this is pretty good. We need to just hit screenshot and it'll save it. So now we have that view. We could change out the backplate, or we could just get rid of the backplate, get rid of the environment, and do some additional views. Maybe I'll do another view where it kind of shows the leg tilt lock mechanism a little closer up. And the one thing I like about KeyShot is how it removes all the need to really think about any sort of technical stuff, and just gives you fairly predictable results while not wasting your time. So I'm just going to let this one last view cook up here, and then we'll get into doing some post-production. So that went pretty quick. There's a little bit of noise, like visual noise on the grain of the chair that I'm not too keen on, and part of that is just the texture map that I used and how it kind of interacts with the real-time render, so it's getting a like additional staticky look to it. But fortunately for us, the real reason we were using this view was for the leg detail itself, so I think we can kind of crop it correctly to make that happen. So anyway, I'm just gonna save this real quick. KeyShot files or BIP files, I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but we'll just call this chair and close out of here. Now let's open up those renders and see what we'll kind of scour through here. The real function of these renders, as I've made them, is really just to show how to render. There wasn't really any sort of end result that we were going for with our renders. What I can do is kind of show you how to kind of touch these up and use some of the composite components that we did to make a little bit more of a believable render. So with this first one, the leg render out of KeyShot, I'm just going to crop this down so that the area of focus that we're really looking for is the legs, and kind of just bring up your levels, Control L in Photoshop, and kind of crush some of those whites out, and maybe amplify the midtones a little bit. I would say for what this is, that could be good. So we'll just save that and close it. I'm just saving them as JPEGs. This KeyShot composite rendering, we actually want to crop out the black on each side, so we'll do that, and maybe tighten up the headspace a little bit. And I think overall we might actually want to put some grain on this. So what I'll do is add a new layer and add a 50% gray fill on top of it. Act as sort of an adjustment layer to make it look as though the chair is a little bit more included in the scene. So all I'm doing is adding a little bit of noise to the 50% gray, and then this is just going to overlay this and kind of start to blend that in. Now for more advanced compositing techniques, let's try multiply, see what that does. That's way too dark. Screen's going to be too light, but then we can bring it down, and yeah, that looks pretty okay. We might add a vignette to that as well, just really add the focus point to the chair itself within the space, and kind of synthesize the two components together. The two components being the chair and the environment it's in. Another thing I can do is actually come to the background layer, duplicate it, and I'm just going to isolate just the leg here, and I'm just roughing this out really quick. Just kind of, figuring out where that leg would be hit by the sunlight that's coming through that window, and just kind of making that its own component. So what I mean by that is we're going to, because we duplicated the background, we can actually make this its own thing. So if I just go to this, that leg is by itself, and now I can adjust the level of just that piece and kind of make it look like it's getting hit by some of that sunlight. Now obviously the back of the leg wouldn't get hit by some of that sunlight as well, so what I'll do is just come back in with the eraser tool and just kind of brush that back out just enough, and that way it's getting a little more illumination on it there. And maybe what we'll do is select part of the back of the chair and have that also get hit by the some of that sunlight too. This is going to be much easier in the V-Ray version. So this is sort of the give and take at KeyShot, is that the way you illuminate something, it might not always look as good in the composite versus when you can actually individually control things. So yeah, something like that, just to bring the tone back up in that region. But I think the chair leg kind of illustrates that a little bit better. And then we'll crop it down just maybe a little bit more, really bring the area of focus to that chair. And I would call this pretty okay. Now the environment that I chose was pretty neutral. It was a lot of gray tones, and there's not a lot of high contrast. So in order to make that really sing, I might flatten everything and adjust the levels all together to really start to blow out some of those colors and make the chair kind of blend into the scene a little bit more. So maybe I'll copy everything I just did and then undo it, and then duplicate it as another layer, and then kind of start playing around with the transfer. So like, see, this is a good test. If you can match the tones of using the hard mix, kind of match the tones to make sure that everything looks like it's all evenly toned, it's going to look like it actually belongs where it is, and then go back to something that sells it a little bit more. So overlay looks kind of nice too. We might do that. It's a little high contrast for my taste, so maybe we'll do overlay, but then bring it down just a little bit and save it. And we'll save that as chair comp 1. Click OK. That looks good. All right, moving on. This is the main shot of the chair by itself. There's the alpha. We don't need the color alpha. We just need the main shot alpha for this composite. So what I want to do is actually open up that environment, and then this is where it gets a little more technical. This is the larger version of that rendering. So we don't want the smaller one. We want the larger one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the alpha, select everything, paste it into this file, make sure it's lined up perfectly. Go. And then we'll group those all together. So we've got these two layers now grouped together, and then what we're going to do is actually drag the entire group onto our composite plate. And you don't really need to worry if your color modes don't match. Don't worry about it unless you're really to transform it, and then just kind of scale it down until it looks about right. Maybe even change the opacity around so that you can actually kind of get a ghosted version of it and see how it looks. All right, so I'm thinking it's probably going to look pretty good right about there. And what we'll do is turn the color mode back to normal. And then this is why we rendered out that alpha. So what I can do is I can actually take that alpha and use it as a clipping mask for everything beneath it. So how I'm going to do that is actually turn off the background turn off the layer beneath it, select the color range, which in this case would be white, turn the fuzziness all the way to the max, and then hide that layer, turn on your color, and then what we're going to do is copy it, and then copy the chair, Control-Shift-V to paste it in place, and then the chair is on its own layer, and then our shadow we'll do again. We'll select the alpha again, select that white, hide it, bring back the image with the ground plane, and this time hit delete, and then you've got a perfect mask. Your chair is perfectly separated away from that ground plane. Okay. And so now that you have that isolated, what you can do is click on the group name, Control-Shift-G to ungroup it, and then now you can toggle between having those shadows there and not having them there. Now the darkness is a little bit light of a shadow, so I'm actually going to duplicate that down a little bit more, and that way it just amplifies those shadows up a little bit, and then we can add the chair back in. Now the chair color is a little bit not matching the levels of the scene itself, so what I'm going to actually do is take that and adjust the levels so that it kind of matches the rest of the scene, so it's a little bit darker. And what we'll do is the same thing we did with the KeyShot rendering of adding in a fill, adding some noise to that, then add that as an overlay. And what that'll do is start to blend the two pieces together. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with the KeyShot rendering, only this time what I'll do is I'll take that back leg and select that region, and also part of the back of the chair that I want to have hit by some of that sunlight. And then I'm going to take those, copy and paste them, and then adjust their levels by blowing out some of that white where I think the sun might be. And don't be afraid to be pretty stark with those shadows, and then you're going to just take your eraser tool and brush them back out so you get a nice soft transition between the two. So with the back of the chair, the fall off, because it's fabric, will be a little bit softer, and then we can come back in on the leg and just brush that out just a little bit more. And then you can see that the plant shadow is actually casting on the leg a little bit, so what we might do is brush out the back end of that to darken it up, and then also just come back in here and add a little bit more shadow in, and you can kind of mess with this to get some of that darkness to be a little more splotchy, and then maybe come back with the burn tool, darken it back in if you need to. So it's, as you can see, it's kind of a give and take situation. Use the dodge tool and lighten some areas back up. Come back to your main layer and just kind of really blow some of that light out. But that should give you a basic general idea of how to do the composite. So the last thing I might want to do is just crop this again so it's a little more focused on the subject matter. Add in a vignette, set that to multiply, then reduce the visibility down to like 40%, maybe even 30%. And I think that looks pretty good. Let me do just this last render here. So with this render and the cushion, what we'll do is we'll put those into one file. So what we'll do is copy the cushion shot over, paste it in here. These are just sort of detail shots, so we can be a little more illustrative with how they work together. So maybe this comes down here. Select some of that white, get rid of it, maybe even put a bounding box around it, I don't know. You know, I mean, once you have the renderings, you can pretty much do whatever you want with them, so it's kind of give and take, but just make something that's looks really nice and can sell your idea in a compelling way. Spend some time going back over highlights, sharpening them up, softening them up if you need to. If something looks like it might be a little bit too blown out, don't be afraid to use the dodge tool and the burn tool to darken those areas up, or lighten them up if they need to. I'm going to darken the underside of the chair a little bit more because I want the focus to be the leg, but I think that looks pretty good. So maybe I'll just save that as a leg detail cushion insert. Click OK, and then I can use that for whatever. Anyway, guys, that pretty much wraps up the intro to rendering series. I hope you have a good base understanding now of how to take all of the elements that we've discussed over this eight video series and use it to apply to make some really cool illustrations and visuals for your next project. Like I said before, make sure you check out some of those links that are below the video, and I'll try to include on the Twitter feed at Polyplane some additional resources as I think of them. If you guys have some resources that you use for rendering, I'd love to hear about. Help out the community. Everybody's always trying to learn. So anyway, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.